Welcome to An Endless Search, a discussion of contemporary religious issues related to the challenges we face in daily life. An Endless Search is sponsored by the Rocky Mountain Rabbinical Council and the Colorado Council of Churches. This is Earl Hanna, moderator, welcoming our guest, Dr. Hasan Askari, founder and director of the Interreligious Foundation and visiting professor at the Iliff School of Theology. Hasan, it is a joy to have you with us this morning. I think it would be of special interest to our listeners to know something about your personal background. Will you share just a few glimpses from your journey of life?
Well, I'm so grateful to be with you this morning. It is so difficult at times to reflect on a journey which began
I might ask you, where were you born?
I was born in India.
In India?
Yes. Mm-hmm. And it was in that country, in mid-60s, that I made a simple discovery that my religion was one among many.
Your religion is one among many. That'll be the theme that I think will come out here again and again. Mm-hmm.
And that made me reflect about the mystery and the necessity of more than one religious understanding.
What is your religious background? Are you Muslim?
Well, I have an Islamic background, but I prefer to remember myself as a seeker.
Mm-hmm. As a what?
As a seeker.
A seeker,
and
yeah.
As a traveler from the many to the one.
You are going to be much in tune with the theme of this program then, An Endless Search.
Yes, perhaps from the many to the one, there is only one step. But from within the one, there is an endless search.
Yes.
An infinity.
Tell us a little more about your background. Did you spend most of your time in, I know the foundation that we're going to talk about later is in England. Spend most of your life in India?
No, I taught in India for more than 18 years as a sociologist, and then having discovered the limits of sociology and of social sciences in general, I moved to philosophy and to mysticism. And then my journey began when I met a few people who were deeply involved in dialogue. And then I became a partner to World Council of Churches and the Vatican and other Christian initiatives to dialogue. And from then on I moved to Lebanon and to Europe and to Holland, where I taught for some time, and then to England.
So you're sort of a world citizen. Is this your first time to be in the United States?
No, it's my third time.
Your third time?
Yes.
I think I've seen that you did some other teaching here. You're at Iliff this spring quarter, but
yes,
where else have you?
I taught at Pendle Hill at a Quaker center, 86, and then came to Hartford Seminary to have a conference on co-responsibility of Muslims and Christians to peace and justice.
Good. Well, I'm so fascinated with your thought about, many ways to interpret life, and yet that logo, I guess I would call it, that lamps are many, but light is one. And you're not familiar with this program, but I guess it's right at the heart of that idea. It seems to me that religion has been such a divisive thing in the human journey, and we get divided up as Muslims and Jews and Christians, and the proclamation that we have all of the truth and others don't. So I'm so fascinated. Will you tell me a little more about the foundation? I think that's one of the things we'd like to hear about.
Well, after having worked in the field of interreligious dialogue at different levels, both international and regional.
Could you tell me a little bit about what you did there? I think this is so needed, you know.
Yes. The WCC, the World Council of Churches, initiated a very massive and vast attempt at dialogue with people of living faith and ideologies. And we met in 1970 in Beirut, then 1972 in Beirut again, and we took Lebanon as both a pointer and a critique and a framework to cultivate a dialogue. But we failed, and then we moved on to Europe and to Birmingham in England, where I taught for a couple of years. But I was impatient, I was restless, I was not satisfied with Christian, Muslim or Jewish approach to dialogue, because they were almost ending up with half measures. Sometimes
each defending itself?
Yes, and almost bordering on a diplomatic dialogue, on a representational dialogue. For me, dialogue is an occasion to be born spiritually as persons before each other and before God. And hence, in order to live these dimensions fully, I created a charity in '82, and I called it Interreligious Foundation. And the basic motto of the foundation was to reflect on the inevitability of our movement from dialogue to co-witness and to mutual mission, because each one has to say something very important to the other.
What groups have been involved or are involved in the foundation? You've mentioned Muslim and Christian and Jews. And
also some Buddhists and some Hindus, and generally those who have opened to a new awareness and who look upon their own traditions as resources, not as imprisoning or enslaving systems. And then have the courage and the humility to relate to the other.
I've had an interesting experience, very limited compared to what you do, but sitting in with a group of some Muslims and Jews and Christians, I think one of the things that I feel disappointed, that maybe isn't the correct word, but one of the things we struggle with is that each feeling that they have a printed word, they have something that, puts them a little higher on the ladder than somebody else. I grew up in that kind of Christian background myself, and the idea that in the Christ you have the ultimate revelation, And it seems to me that as long as we cling to the idea that we have something that is exclusive, we're never going to bring this all together. Does that coincide with where you are?
Yes, this has been one of the great stumbling blocks in dialogue. And I have reflected...
How do you get over that?
Yeah, I have reflected a lot on the whole question of finality, that Torah is final for the Jews, and after Torah, Jesus is irrelevant to the Jews. And then, after Jesus, Islam appears in history. So we have a serial, unilinear understanding of revelation. But experientially and mystically, I overcame that obstacle within me first, realizing that as far as God is concerned, every revelation is contemporary to Him, without any division of time. So whoever becomes contemporary to one prophet and one revelation becomes contemporary to every other. And therefore finality is a vertical intersection with history, every moment. And then people ask me, how about actual response? Well, finality to me is a measure of total response in encounter to a man or woman of God. For instance, I recall, and I give this example quite often, when Peter encountered Jesus, in that encounter, Peter should respond to Jesus completely, exclusively, and totally. I would regard Peter a fool if he would refer to my philosophy of religion at that time and say, well, God has revealed in so many forms and manifestations, so thank you, Jesus. So that is, to me, not an act of total response. At that moment, for Peter, Jesus was final.
That's such an interesting idea. I want to pursue it a little.
Yes.
So there is a place for what you're using the word of finality, but final is not the end. I mean, there has to be movement on beyond. So at heart, you are very much a process thinker, aren't you? I mean, open to all sources and ideas.
I don't use the word process because it has got all sorts of connotations.
Yeah.
I would just say that in the reality of spiritual life, in very, very deep religious experiences, objective, abstract finalities have no room, have no place. When we respond to somebody in spirit, when we stand in prayer before God, we don't enact our dogmatic finalities at all. When I stand in prayer before God, I don't say, oh God, just see that a Muslim stands before thee. No Christian would say that.
I'm afraid some would, but go ahead.
So we lay aside our collective representational historical identity and become just a person before God. And even then, that is also burdensome.
Related to all we're talking about, it seems that this perspective that you're sharing, institutions of religion really get in the road, don't they? Or is that your experience? I mean, let me say a word or two what I'm trying to mean. When we talk about ecumenicity in the church, it's our institutions, our vested interest, even in denominations and interpretations. And in a next program, I want to talk more about what we might call moving beyond that. We talked a little bit about Mr. Einstein's idea. But these institutions of religion, I guess, are necessary, but they also become an obstruction, right?
True. They are necessary in terms of being schools and foundations of growth, but become an obstacle when they imprison the spirit.
They ought to be a means of progress, but they become an end, don't they?
And when they take the place of God, then they become a blasphemy.
Well, I've been so fascinated with your approach and perspective here, and we will continue this. We thank you this morning, Hasan, for being our guest. An Endless Search has been sponsored by the Colorado Council of Churches and the Rocky Mountain Rabbinical Council. Join us again next Sunday for An Endless Search as we continue our dialogue with Professor Hasan Askari, founder and director of Interreligious Foundation and the visiting professor at the Iliff School of Theology. This is Earl Hanna thanking you for sharing. Welcome to An Endless Search, a discussion of contemporary religious issues related to the challenges we face in daily life. An Endless Search is sponsored by the Rocky Mountain Rabbinical Council and the Colorado Council of Churches. This is Earl Hanna, moderator, welcoming our guest, Dr. Hasan Askari, founder and director of the Interreligious Foundation and visiting professor at the Iliff School of Theology. Hasan, it's a joy to have you back with us again. Last Sunday, you shared with us a little bit your personal journey. We talked a bit about the foundation that you established. This morning, I would like to begin by focusing upon how you see the reality of our world and our problems today? Is this basically a theological matter? What's holding us back? We've got problems in the Mideast, Ireland. Those are dramatic places, but we have tension spots. We're not becoming one people. As I'm a great believer that Archibald MacLeish was on target when he said we've got to see ourselves as riders together on the planet Earth. Is this a theological challenge, or how do you see that?
Well, in my work, both in the Middle East and in Europe, and as I continue to reflect, I feel more and more confirmed in my intuitive approach that it is the loss of transcendence, the loss of the sense of the mystery of the oneness of God that has landed all of us in this great, vast disorder.
Mm-hmm.
When I spoke in Beirut in 1977, a group of Muslims and Christians, I said clearly and loudly that we should now confess to each other that we have theologically failed.
Mm-hmm.
And I just wondered, how is it that that God whom we invoke as the God of the heavens and the earth, and of all creation, and of the beginning and of the end of all time, that God we dismember and divide in history. Once I stood outside Vienna in 1977 at the spot where exactly Ottoman Turks stood, having led the second siege to Vienna in 1685. And on that spot that evening, I realized that God was on both the sides. How could God else be? We don't worship the gods of Rome, of Egypt, of Babylon, of cities. We worship the God who is transcendent and one.
Let me ask for a moment of clarification here. When you talk about the God that is transcendent, I think I've visited with you enough, I almost know, but you're not talking about some far-off entity, but you're talking about that more than quality, the mystery that is inherent to it all. Is that part of what you're talking about?
By transcendence, I mean an intimacy, a nearness, a oneness, mm-hmm. which is not absolutely equated with one locality, or with one time, or with one religion. In that sense, God is near to everyone in cosmos.
The God is the something more of life. Sometimes I use this with a class of children. That when I go to hear the Denver Symphony, mm-hmm. or a symphony orchestra anywhere, mm-hmm. You could analyze mm-hmm. that here you have 90 musicians, mm-hmm. you have a certain score of music in front of them, you have so many violins, violas, cellos, French horns, etc. Yes. And you could put all of that on a scope, but there's something more, mm-hmm. and that it is that something more that is great music. I'd like to think that God is the something more of life. Is that sort of what you're talking about?
Something more in the sense that He, by being far above our powers of comprehension mm-hmm. and experience, mm-hmm. comes near to us and right within us mm-hmm. by the degree of incomprehensibility. Otherwise, something which we comprehend completely, right. we manipulate, right. and we use, we exploit.
And I feel as I go about in churches, if I might put this comment in, that we're at a kind of a folksy time in our worship and so forth, and that the sense of mystery and the transcendent is lost in what we do. As we were getting acquainted, we talked a little bit about Albert Einstein mm-hmm. and his observation that primitive religion is based on fear, mm-hmm. that he credits the Jewish, Christian, and some of the Eastern religions with a religion of morality, of doing what I guess across the years, I've come to feel that that's such a dismal approach to religion. You know, I hear people say we ought to go to church, we ought to be good, and so forth. That seemed like such a limiting view. But then Einstein talks about that there have been those moments when we have an awareness of the cosmic wonderment. The psalmist saying, what is man that thou art mindful of him? But he's relating it to the moon and the stars. And this is very close, I think, to what I hear you talking about.
Yes, yes. In one sense, both the cosmic and the deeply subjective constitute a unity. And it is in that oneness that we glimpse for a little while the mystery of his or her oneness. For me, the mystery is about the oneness of God. How one is in many. How he is both the all-merciful and the great judge. How he is revealed in thunder and lightning, and also in tenderness, in softness, and how he is revealed on Mount Sinai, in the burning bush, in the majesty of its heights, and also in the loneliness, in the passion, in the suffering of Jesus on Good Friday. It is this mystery.
Yeah.
And therefore I get impatient with people who divide religions and therefore divide God by saying, here this manifestation is supreme and final.
Yes.
And there something is supreme and final. This to me is dismemberment of the divine mystery.
I think Ernest Hawkins talked about alternation, that there's and in funeral services, I think this is very close to what you're saying. There's the God of the high noon, but also the midnight. The God of the spring, but also the autumn, the summer, the winter.
Exactly.
The God of the young and the God of the old, the
Beautiful.
God of life.
That is it. That is it, what I'm talking about.
And the 23rd Psalm, you know, in its simplistic approach, the God of life, in the green pastures, beside the still waters, but also the God in the valley. And I couldn't agree with you more in that. It's so beautiful to hear you saying that, because I think we have such partial views, and that's what I keep hearing you say.
I'm applying these dimensions in the Bible, in the Quran, in the Psalms, in our prayers, in our hymns, to religions themselves. I'm applying the God of nature to the God of religions. And therefore I feel that the multiplicity of the religious traditions, what I call the religious manifold, is perhaps the most effective device given by providence of God himself to preserve his grace and mystery. Otherwise, if we have only one religion on this planet, then we equate that religion to his mystery, and we absolutize our understanding. And therefore the conflict, the difference, the variety of religious cultures and traditions. And therefore, in that sense, we could come home in synagogue, in church, in temple, in mosque, and rejoice in being the servants of the same Lord.
I want to go back and hear you say this again, because I think it is such a profound perspective. But I hear you saying that how our theological interpretation of life and our being is at the heart of who we are and our hopes for the future. And we can't make, would you concur that I don't think we can generate enough social programs, we can't have enough conferences for peace or whatever, if we're not theologically clear, we're never going to make it. Is that?
Yes, I mean, the theological clarity and perception of oneness and transcendence would lead us away from those imprisoning and enslaving.
So religion can be the great unifying relationship to the mystery of being, or if it is made more parochial, it can become the great divider.
Yes.
And
It
unfortunately,
becomes its own shadow.
yeah. Let me ask, do you think we're making progress in this?
I am greatly overwhelmed, particularly in the West, and recently the last 4 weeks in America, because I discover what I call an inner West of a great space within the Western soul.
Say a little more about that.
And that, to me, is a sign from among the signs of God that however distressing are the signs and the circumstances, the soul of man, and in this instance the soul of the Western man, is opening to a new consciousness. I am only praying that the Western soul at this moment in time should not take that opening for granted, but should strive every moment to preserve it and to strengthen it. And that could be done only in relationship with the other who is not like us.
And you feel that
that is happening.
That is happening.
That's happening. And that to me is the event. And that to me is the sacrament. And here I find people recognizing and affirming each other when they look into each other's eyes, whatever tradition they belong to. And that to me is the inward fellowship. And that to me is the group about whom we hear Jesus saying that they are the salt of the earth.
Do you think this is happening in a general way, or are you talking about some of the leaders of the West?
No, I'm not talking about the leaders of the West. I'm talking about ordinary people. I'm talking about students. I'm talking about people whom we meet all of a sudden on a pavement, in a cafe. I am talking about the general event, because once we identify who they are, then perhaps we make them very privileged. And therefore, in that self-understanding, sometimes I feel, Earl, that it is the self-conscious good which creates its own evil shadow. Once when we remain unconsciously good, and that is the meaning of innocence, that is the being of becoming childlike, then perhaps we can gather all these shadows into one point of light.
And that is our hope.
Yes, God willing.
Thank you, Professor Hasan Askari, for being our guest this morning. An Endless Search has been sponsored by the Colorado Council of Churches and the Rocky Mountain Rabbinical Council. We trust the thoughts shared this morning will be a source of enrichment to your life. Join us again next Sunday for An Endless Search as we continue our dialogue with Professor Hasan Askari, founder and director of the Interreligious Foundation and visiting professor at the Iliff School of Theology. This is Earl Hanna, thanking you for sharing. Welcome to An Endless Search, a discussion of contemporary religious issues related to the challenges we face in daily life. An Endless Search is sponsored by the Rocky Mountain Rabbinical Council and the Colorado Council of Churches. This is Earl Hanna, moderator, welcoming our guest, Dr. Hasan Askari, founder and director of the Interreligious Foundation and visiting professor at the Iliff School of Theology. Hasan, it's been great to have you with us these mornings. And last week we reviewed the theological perspective that I think was so meaningful. This morning I'd like to have you focus with us on the relationship of the Jewish, the Christian, the Muslim traditions that we have so much in common, and yet we seem to be so divided. I know that you are a student of this, and will you share with us some perspectives, some thoughts about where we are in this and how it's relating to our world?
At times I'm deeply distressed at what I see all around, both in the West and also in the Middle East proper, that Judaism, Christianity, and Islam so deeply interlocked in one great concern, namely to witness the almighty mystery of one and transcendental God, continued through centuries to live in mutual fear and distrust.
Jerusalem might be looked at as what? Almost a symbol of all that you're saying here. It is the hub of the three great faiths, so much in common, and yet in the source of war.
And it is a city where there is sorrow, and there is pain, and there is division. And therefore it needs to be told and retold many times over. First, on a very positive, on a very, very deeply shared level, how these three mighty traditions share, and they belong to one common root. They are theistic through and through. They are perhaps the only traditions which so rigorously and so seriously uphold a monotheistic perspective. And they have a responsibility, a co-responsibility, to say no to the false absolutes of our times, to injustice, to oppression, to war. But their potentiality to say no to the false absolutes is reduced, because each one of them has absolutized its own doctrine and identity. And therefore I have always insisted that they should come back in togetherness, what I call the Abrahamic unity of Jews, Christians, and Muslims.
Do you think that the day may be dawning when that can happen, and do you see any evidence of it happening at this time?
Again, to be consistent to what I said to you last Sunday and before, I don't look forward to a coming together of groups, of communities, of representational cultures. I look forward to another coming together.
To
of
what?
individuals.
Individuals.
Of people. Wherever two people or three people stand in that relationship, there I see the temple. There I see that New Jerusalem.
Maybe that's related to a little child shall lead them. Maybe it's back to the people, not the institutions that will make the progress.
So we need each one of them. We need the witness of the Jew in world history. We need the witness of the Christian in world history. We need the witness of the Muslim in world history. We need a mutuality which can support each one of them. And we need a corresponding socio-political form which can sustain that mutuality on a spiritual level.
I would like to hear you express again the unique contribution of each of these. What is it that Judaism has given to the world, and Christianity and the Muslims? I think you have done that, and that's beautiful.
Yes, I'm so grateful that I had this opportunity, and I am not saying that one should universalize and generalize to the extent of getting away or drowning one's own specificity. I am saying that specificity is only an emphasis among many other emphases.
And if you can put them together. I mean, not to make one, but to use the inside of each.
It is this interaction between Judaism, Christianity, and Islam which will constitute to me one complex of faith.
Now, you were saying in a conversation that the Jewish tradition, tell us the enrichment you see in each of these. The Jewish, you said, gave to us a God that is beyond images. The Christians, the personification of love. Would you kind of relate that?
I look at it and I'm fascinated, I'm excited at the variety of these responses and how they hold on to an inner unity which sometimes they ignore or perhaps try to set aside. For instance, the Jewish witness is to the witness of one invisible, formless divinity.
A formless divinity, yes.
And for that they were made a witness among the nations. And if we look at the Christian witness, it is the witness of the manifestation of an immanent God who is revealed in suffering, in loneliness. And then we come to Islam, we see the Jewish insistence on formlessness, on invisibility, repeated, but now extended to go beyond the Jewish fold. And then Islam also emphasizes transcendence of God above belief. So each one is a critique for the other. Each one affirms the other. So in this critical affirmative relationship, we have the unity of the Abrahamic witness. And there alone perhaps lies the secret of peace within and peace without.
If we could take the light of each one of those and let it be blended together, the path would
brighten.
Yeah.
Yes, and then there'll be more light.
So helpful to hear you, and I hope, and I'm sure that a lot of listeners are going to be thinking, this is a word that we need. And thank God for voices such as yours.
Thank you very much.
I'd like to just touch back to your foundation a little bit. Are there ways that people can get involved in this? You see, as one who's been a pastor for the last 40 years, I see the church muddling around, not dealing with this very much. I think theologically, a lot of our mainline churches are somewhat dormant at this point in time. But I sense there's a lot of people out there who realize that we need to be looking, in this direction. What suggestions would you have for people that are searching for this?
The foundation is right, each within us, to grow in that direction. But I am thinking that I should perhaps initiate a few steps to have a U.S. chapter of the foundation here in Denver, and to provide a forum for people to come together and to reflect together on the mystery and on the beauty of our shared motto that lamps are many, but the light is one.
Yeah. As a pastor, I have had the experience that we have done something, I'm not suggesting we have done it as well, but this has been the spirit of ministry of a church. And I've never completed a theological session, but what people come and say, why are we not hearing more of this from the churches and so forth? I think there's a hunger for this. I think that ties in with your confidence of what you said you see in the West. And if there's a possibility that a foundation might come into being here, I think it'd be a glorious thing.
Yes, I look forward to a greater sharing on this side of the Atlantic. And it is not a question of developing an institution, an organization. No. I would like to see every one of us, while he or she speaks or relates, impart to the other a dimension of an opening, of an enlargement, of an extension. Not in pride that we possess now a universal truth, but in humility, in patience.
I guess history would affirm that if you institutionalize it and get it too organized, then it may become another part of the same instruction. Yeah. Do you find with your seminary students that you're working with, is there a real openness to this?
I'm delighted. We have constituted now a fellowship me and my students, his students and me, and we sometimes feel that we are one spirit. And I have great hopes for Iliff to grow in that direction. And here I find a great opening. And I pray, and I wait, and I pray again.
Who goes to your foundation, these meetings? Are these people that just, they're not necessarily the top leaders of the churches and synagogues and so forth?
Most of our members are ordinary people. We call them seekers. Some of them are also scholars and some well-known people, but it is open to anybody who feels the need to go beyond, outside one's own particular fold. And that is perhaps the real meaning of pilgrimage. And here on a pilgrimage we can't make any distinctions between one or the other.
Someone that may not be a trained theologian may sense this mystery far more than some trained theologian. I mean, the awareness of that transcendent mystery is just one of those things that can enter life anywhere, right?
Yes, I can't say much on that but when we invoke the mystery, we invoke an unpredictable act in history. So both the layman and the theologian would be affected by it, depending how one or the other or both are open at one time or the other in their lives.
Good.
So I rejoice in the mystery, and therefore we are many.
Good.
And also one at the same time.
Well, thank you, Professor Hasan Askari. We have been greatly enriched these